Welcome to the world of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening.
James Carter adjusted the collar of his uniform as the shuttle docked with Zeta Halo, the sprawling space station that served as the neutral ground for the galaxy's various civilizations. The hum of the engine subsided, replaced by the soft chime of the airlock engaging. "Welcome to Zeta Halo," Ambassador Carter greeted the AI in a soothing tone as the doors slid open. Stepping into the bustling hub of the station, James was greeted by a flurry of alien diplomats, traders, and beings of descriptions so varied they defied categorization. His guide, an android named Kiv, was waiting just outside the shuttle bay. "Good day, Ambassador. I am assigned to assist you during your tenure here," Kiv said, its voice devoid of any discernible accent. James nodded, his eyes still wandering over the crowd. "Lead the way, Kiv, and brief me about the major issues on today's agenda." As they walked, Kiv outlined the schedule, mentioning trade disputes, territorial negotiations, and, almost as an afterthought, the matter of a prisoner kept under strict surveillance. "She's a Vionix, quite far from home. Been here longer than I've been operational," Kiv added. James perked up. "A prisoner, you say? Why is she here?" "Classified, mostly. She's been subjected to certain treatments. They call it desire injections, intended to enhance her influence for interrogation purposes," Kiv explained clinically. James frowned, his diplomatic instincts tingling with a mix of concern and curiosity. "I want to meet her. Where is she held?" "It's highly irregular, Ambassador," Kiv cautioned. "I know, but it's imperative I understand all aspects of this council's operations if I am to report back effectively." "Arrange a visit." Kiv paused, processing the request. "Very well, I'll make the arrangements." The lower levels of Zeta Halo were starkly different from the vibrant commerce and diplomacy of the upper tiers. Here, the corridors were silent and cold. Kiv led James to a secured wing, where they were met by another human, Security Chief Rylan. "Kiv tells me you want to see the Vionix?" Rylan asked, his brow furrowing under a mop of graying hair. "Yes. It's crucial I understand her situation." "How long has she been here?" "Nearly 4 cycles," Rylan replied, leading them through several security checkpoints. "She's different, I'll give you that. Doesn't speak much, but when she does, the room listens." They stopped before a reinforced door. Rylan punched in a code, and the door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the room was dimly lit, the air tinged with a sterile chill. At the center, a figure stood gazing out a window to the stars beyond. Her skin shimmered subtly, an effect of her biology rather than any ambient light. James stepped inside, his diplomatic smile in place. "Hello, I'm James Carter, Earth's ambassador. May I know your name?" The alien turned, her eyes piercing yet weary. "Lyria," she replied, her voice melodious but tinged with a hint of sorrow. "Lyria, I've come to understand your situation," James said, moving closer but keeping a respectful distance. "Can you tell me about these injections?" Lyria studied him for a moment, seemingly measuring his sincerity. "They alter my pheromones, amplify emotions around me to make others more compliant. It's manipulation, through and through." James nodded, his concern deepening. "I see. That must be very challenging." "It is not a life I chose," she said quietly, turning back to the window. James and Rylan exchanged a glance. "Thank you for sharing that, Lyria. We'll speak more." "I promise you," James said, stepping back as Rylan closed the door. As they left the holding area, James's mind raced. He was here to foster peace and understanding, yet he'd found himself facing a moral quandary he hadn't anticipated. How to help Lyria, and whether he could do so without sparking a larger conflict, weighed heavily on him as he followed Kiv back to the diplomacy of the upper tiers. This encounter, though brief, had set the stage for what would become a deep and complex involvement in Lyria's plight, far beyond the typical duties of an ambassador. The corridors of Zeta Halo felt colder as James returned to his quarters, the weight of his meeting with Lyria hanging heavy on his mind. In his room, he sat at his desk, reviewing the notes he'd taken. He was startled out of his reverie by a chime at his door. "It's open," he called. The door slid aside, revealing Dr. Henrik Larsson, the station's lead medical officer, an old friend from James's academy days. Henrik's face wore a look of concern as he entered. "James, I heard about your visit to the Vinex prisoner," Henrik began, settling into a chair across from him. "It's a tricky situation. I've seen her file. It's not pretty what they've been doing to her." James leaned back, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It's unethical, Henrik. We need to do something." "I agree. But you know the politics here. It's a powder keg. Helping her could have complications," Henrik replied, his tone cautious. James's jaw set firmly. "I didn't sign up to turn a blind eye. What can you tell me about these injections?" Henrik sighed, pulling up data on his tablet. "They're a form of biochemical manipulation. They enhance her natural pheromones to extreme levels, making her capable of influencing emotions profoundly. It's a form of control, coercion. That has to stop. Can they be reversed?" James asked, a plan beginning to form in his mind. "It's possible, but I'd need access to her and my full lab setup. And James, I'd be risking my position here. Maybe more," Henrik cautioned. James met his friend's eyes firmly. "I know, and I wouldn't ask if it weren't important. Are you with me?" After a moment, Henrik nodded. "Of course. Let's figure out a way." The following days were a blur of clandestine meetings and secret plans. James enlisted the help of another human, Chief Engineer Marco Santini, to help with the logistics of accessing Lyria without alerting station security. Marco, a robust man with a knack for bending station protocols, met with James and Henrik in a secluded section of the engineering bay. "If we're doing this, we'll need to be smart," Marco said, laying out schematics of the station on a digital projector. "Security is tight around her wing, but there's a maintenance hatch here, not monitored as closely." Henrik leaned over the plans. "I can bring my portable medical scanner through here. It's less suspicious if I'm doing routine checks." "Good," James nodded. "I'll create a diversion. Something to draw security away at just the right moment." "What about afterwards? If they find out what we've done, they won't let it slide," Marco pointed out, his brow furrowed. "We'll need an exit strategy," James agreed. "I'm working on that. For now, let's focus on getting Henrik in there to assess her condition and start reversing those injections." The three men worked late into the night, refining every detail of their plan. Trusting in each other's abilities and united by a common cause, they were determined to restore Lyria's freedom, even if it meant risking their own. The tension in the air was palpable as the day of the operation approached. In his quarters, James went over the plan with Henrik and Marco one last time. "Everything needs to be timed perfectly," James stressed, looking at both men seated across from him. Marco nodded, tapping on his tablet to bring up the security rotations. "I've synced the maintenance schedules to overlap with our window. Henrik, you'll have a 40-minute gap." Henrik rubbed his forehead, his face showing the strain. 40 minutes to assess and start treatment. "It's tight, but I'll manage." James stood, pacing slightly. "While you're in there, I'll engage Commander Talek in a discussion about trade routes. It should keep his attention away from the security feeds. Let's hope your diplomatic charm is as effective as they say," Marco joked lightly, trying to ease the mounting pressure. The day unfolded with agonizing slowness until it was time to enact their plan. Henrik, carrying a nondescript medical kit, approached the forbidden wing. At the same moment, James found Commander Talek in the bustling central hub. "Commander, have you got a moment? There are some discrepancies in the trade agreements I think we should discuss," James said, projecting urgency. Commander Talek, a towering figure with sharp eyes, nodded. "Lead the way, Ambassador." As they moved off, Marco watched from a discreet distance, his hand ready at his console to manipulate the security cameras. The moment they were engaged in conversation, he flicked a switch, and the cameras near the medical wing flickered briefly before showing a looped corridor, empty and silent. Inside the medical wing, Henrik swiftly entered Lyria's room. The Vinex woman looked up, her expression wary. "Dr. Larsson, was it? What are you doing here?" Lyria's voice was calm, but carried an undertone of suspicion. Henrik set down his kit, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. "I'm here to help, Lyria. I believe we can reverse the effects of the injections you've been given. Why would you help me?" Lyria asked, her gaze piercing. Because it's the right thing to do, Henrik replied, meeting her eyes firmly. I need you to trust me. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? Just relax as best you can. This might feel a bit strange. Henrik prepared a syringe with a clear, viscous liquid. This is a counter serum. It should start reversing the effects of the injections. As he administered the treatment, back in the central hub, James kept Commander Talek engrossed in discussion, expertly steering the conversation to keep his interest piqued. And with the proposed changes, we could increase efficiency by at least 15%, James explained, showing Talek diagrams and projections on his device. Talek, thoroughly absorbed, nodded appreciatively. Impressive, Ambassador. I'll need to consult with my advisors, but this looks promising. Meanwhile, Henrik monitored Lyria as the serum took effect. How do you feel? A bit dizzy, but clearer, Lyria murmured, her voice steadier than before. That's good. It means it's working. We'll need more sessions, but this is a start. As Henrik packed up, Marco's voice came through both their earpieces. Time to wrap up, guys. You've got less than 5 minutes before security makes the rounds. Henrik exited the room just as James excused himself from Talek. They converged at their predetermined meeting spot, faces tense until they were safely behind closed doors. Phase 1 complete, Henrik sighed, relief washing over him. James clapped both men on the shoulders. Well done, both of you. Let's keep the momentum going. Lyria's counting on us. Their operation had begun as a risky venture, but with each step, they grew more determined to see it through, fueled by the hope of freeing Lyria and righting a wrong that had gone unchecked for too long. In the days following the first successful treatment, the trio, James, Henrik, and Marco, found their routine punctuated by tension and whispers of suspicion. With each secret visit to Lyria, they risked discovery, but the need to continue her treatments pushed them forward. One evening, as they gathered in a dimly lit storage room to discuss their next steps, Marco broke the uneasy silence. We've got a problem, he said, pulling up a series of encrypted messages on his tablet. Security protocols are being updated sooner than expected. I think someone's on to us. James leaned over the screen, his brow furrowed as he read the coded text. Can you delay the updates? I can try, but if they're suspicious, it might only buy us a day or two, Marco replied, his voice strained. Henrik rubbed his temples, worry creasing his features. We need more time. Lyria's treatment isn't complete. If they stop us now, we won't let that happen, James interrupted, his determination clear. Let's increase our precautions. We can't afford a slip-up. Later that week, as Henrik prepared for another treatment session, he and James met in a corridor near the medical wing to synchronize their watches. Be extra careful today, James advised. I've heard rumors that security has been asking about unusual activity around here. Henrik nodded, his expression grim. Understood. I'll be as quick as possible. As Henrik slipped into Lyria's room, James headed to the control center where he had arranged to meet with a junior security officer, Liam, whom he had started to cultivate as a potential ally. Officer Liam, thanks for meeting me, James began, offering a handshake. Liam, a young human with sharp eyes, returned the handshake. Of course, Ambassador. How can I assist you today? James leaned in, lowering his voice. I've been hearing things about security upgrades. Seems like it might disrupt some essential, delicate negotiations I'm handling. Any insight you could share? Liam glanced around nervously before responding. It's true. There's been talk about tightening security. Something about unauthorized accesses. They're being pretty tight-lipped about it. James's heart sank, but he kept his expression neutral. I see. Well, keeping the station safe is the top priority, of course. Just hope it doesn't interfere with our diplomatic missions. Of course, Ambassador. I'll let you know if I hear anything that might affect your work, Liam offered. Thank you, Liam. I appreciate it, James said, parting with a nod. Back in Lyria's room, Henrik worked quickly, administering another dose of the counter serum. Lyria, now familiar with the procedure, met his eyes with an unspoken gratitude. How are you feeling, Lyria? Any changes since our last session? Henrik asked, packing his equipment. Stronger. More myself, she replied softly. I'm starting to remember things I thought I had forgotten. That's a good sign, Henrik said with a smile. It means your mind is clearing from the manipulations. Just as Henrik was about to leave, Lyria caught his arm. Thank you, Henrik, for risking so much. Henrik nodded, touched by her words. We're in this together. After Henrik exited, he met James outside, who looked worried. Security's getting tighter. We may need to accelerate the plan. We'll do what we must, Henrik affirmed. Let's just hope Marco's diversions hold. As they parted ways, both men felt the weight of the looming security threat. Unknown to them, their conversations and movements were being monitored more closely than they realized, drawing the noose tighter around their clandestine efforts. James, Henrik, and Marco gathered in a secluded junction of the station, their faces etched with lines of worry and determination. The latest security updates were rolling out faster than they had anticipated, forcing them to act sooner than planned. Tonight's the night, Marco declared, checking the data on his handheld device. The next security update goes live at 0200 hours. If we're going to move, it has to be before then. James nodded sharply. Henrik, are you sure Lyria is ready for this? Henrik sighed, his eyes reflecting his concern. As ready as she'll ever be under these circumstances. The last treatment helped significantly. She's stronger and more aware. But the stress of an escape could still be taxing. We don't have a choice, James stated flatly. It's now or never. Marco laid out the escape plan on his tablet. I've secured an unused supply shuttle. It's old but operational. I'll reroute its launch sequence to coincide with our escape, making it look like a scheduled maintenance flight. James turned to Henrik. You'll need to get Lyria out of her cell into the shuttle bay without alerting anyone. Can you handle that? Henrik nodded. I'll sedate her lightly so she won't feel much during the transport. It'll look like I'm moving a patient to the medical bay, and I'll create a diversion, James added. I've arranged a diplomatic faux pas that'll need resolving. It should draw the commander and his top aides away from the control center. Let's synchronize our times, Marco suggested. Everyone set their watches in unison. As the station's clocks crept towards midnight, Henrik made his way to Lyria's cell with a medical hovercart. Inside, Lyria lay waiting, her expression one of mixed fear and resolve. It's time, Henrik whispered, helping her onto the cart and covering her with a sterile sheet as if she were a patient. Stay quiet and we'll be through this soon. Meanwhile, James engaged Commander Talek and his staff in a heated debate over a fabricated protocol breach involving one of the ambassadorial ships. I assure you, Commander, allowing a ship from the contested quadrant through without proper clearance could jeopardize our entire operation, James argued with controlled intensity. Commander Talek, distracted by the potential scandal, coordinated with his officers, his back to the surveillance feeds. Marco, in the meantime, slipped into the control room, his fingers flying over the console to input the last sequence for the shuttle's unauthorized launch. Back in the corridors, Henrik pushed Lyria swiftly, but cautiously towards the docking bay. They passed several security checkpoints, but thanks to Marco's manipulation, all eyes were elsewhere. Reaching the shuttle bay, they found Marco waiting by the shuttle, its engines humming softly. We're all set. Let's get her on board, Marco urged, helping Henrik lift Lyria into the shuttle. As they strapped her in, Lyria murmured a weak thanks, her eyes glinting with tears of relief and fear. You're saving my life, she said, her voice a mere whisper. Just hang on a little longer, Henrik reassured her, checking her vital signs one last time. James arrived at the shuttle bay, just as the station's alarm began to wail. We triggered something. We need to leave now, he exclaimed, glancing back at the approaching security forces. Marco slammed the shuttle door shut and raced to the cockpit, initiating the launch sequence. The shuttle vibrated as the thrusters engaged, and with a powerful lurch, they were propelled into the starlit void of space. Behind them, Zeta Halo grew smaller, a myriad of lights against the backdrop of deep space, while ahead lay the unknown, fraught with peril but also promising freedom. As the shuttle hurtled through the void of space, James, Marco, and Henrik sat in the cramped cockpit, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of the control panels. Lyria rested in the back, still sedated but stable. The tension among them was palpable. Their escape had been close, too close. James broke the silence first, his voice low and steady. "Marco, where are we headed? Do we have a safe haven lined up?" Marco nodded, swiping through the navigation charts on the display. "There's an old research station in the Omra sector, abandoned but still habitable. We should be able to lay low there until we figure out our next move." Henrik turned to look back at Lyria, checking the monitors that displayed her vital signs. "She's going to need proper care once we arrive. Those treatments, they took a lot out of her." "We'll take care of it," James reassured him, then directed his gaze to Marco. "How long till we reach the Omra sector?" "Few hours at most," Marco replied, his eyes never leaving the screens. "I'm keeping us on a low-energy trajectory, harder to track." As they approached the station, the stark silhouette of the derelict structure came into view against the backdrop of a distant nebula. The beauty of it was stark, juxtaposed against their grim situation. "Here we are, gentlemen. Our temporary home," Marco announced as he initiated the docking sequence. Once docked, the group moved quickly to transfer Lyria to the station's makeshift medical bay. The facility was dusty and cold, a ghost of its former self, but it would serve their needs. As Henrik set up his equipment, James explored the station, looking for anything that might be useful. He found old food supplies, water recycling units, and even some spare parts that could come in handy. "Looks like we can hold up here for a while," James called out as he returned to the group. Marco, who had been setting up security measures around the station, joined him. "I've rigged a few alarms and traps at the main access points. We'll know if anyone comes knocking." Henrik finished his examination of Lyria and joined the others. "She's waking up," he announced. The group gathered around Lyria as she slowly opened her eyes, confusion and fear evident in her gaze. "Where are we?" she asked weakly. "You're safe," James reassured her gently. "We're in a hideout, far from Zeta Halo." "You're free, Lyria." Her eyes filled with tears, a mix of relief and uncertainty. "What now? What happens to me?" "We're figuring that out," Henrik replied. "But we're with you. You're not alone in this." Lyria nodded, her expression hardening with determination. "I want to help. Whatever it takes to stop them from doing this to anyone else." "That's the plan," Marco said. "But first, we need to ensure you're fully recovered and strong." James pulled up a chair next to her bed. "We need to know everything you can tell about the treatments, who's behind them, and how we can expose them." Over the next few hours, Lyria recounted her experiences, the details of her capture, the injections, and the effects they had on her mind and body. James listened intently, recording everything, a plan forming in his mind. "We need to go public with this," James concluded. "We'll need solid evidence, and your testimony could blow this wide open." "I'll do whatever it takes," Lyria affirmed, her voice resolute. As they strategized into the night, the bonds of their makeshift family grew stronger. United by a common cause, they prepared to take on a fight larger than any of them had anticipated. The quiet station in the Omra sector, once a place of solitude and reflection, had become the center of their rebellion. In the dimly lit confines of the Omra sector station, James, Henrik, Marco, and Lyria huddled around a salvaged communication console, their faces lit by the flickering screen. They were preparing to broadcast the truth about the injections and Lyria's treatment to the intergalactic community. "Are we sure the signal will reach the right people?" Marco asked, adjusting the settings on the console. James nodded. "I've sent covert messages to my contacts. They'll be watching. We just need to make sure our broadcast can't be traced back here." Henrik checked the connection again. "It's as secure as I can make it. Once we go live, there's no turning back." Lyria took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm ready. Let's do this." James placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Whenever you're ready, Lyria." She nodded, and Marco initiated the transmission. A light blinked on, and Lyria began to speak, her voice calm but firm. "To those listening, my name is Lyria. I am a Vionix, and I was a prisoner on Zeta Halo. I was subjected to biochemical modifications against my will, designed to enhance my natural pheromones to manipulate others. This treatment, known as desire injections, is being used without consent on beings from multiple systems. Today, we expose this atrocity. Henrik then stepped forward, detailing the medical aspects. The injections alter chemical balances in the brain, leading to heightened emotional influence over others. We have evidence of these modifications and their effects, all of which are illegal under the Galactic Health Accord. James followed, outlining the political implications. The use of such treatments for interrogation and manipulation undermines our collective security and trust. We call for an immediate investigation into these practices and full accountability for those responsible. Marco concluded, we will distribute the evidence to all major news outlets across the galaxy. We demand justice, not just for Lyria but for all victims of such violations. The broadcast ended, and the group sat in tense silence, waiting. It didn't take long for responses to flood in. Messages of support, outrage, and calls for action pinged the console incessantly. It's out there now, Marco said, a hint of relief in his tone. No going back. Lyria looked at each of her companions, her eyes glistening. Thank you, all of you, for helping me do this, for believing in me. James smiled warmly. We're in this together. It's only just beginning, but we'll see it through, whatever it takes. Henrik added, let's monitor the reactions and prepare for any fallout. There might be attempts to discredit the broadcast, but the evidence should be indisputable. Marco returned to the console, his fingers dancing across the controls. I'll keep an eye on the incoming transmissions and track how far the broadcast spreads. As the hours passed, the group watched the galaxy react. Governments issued statements, organizations pledged support, and citizens from countless worlds voiced their solidarity. The revelation shook the intergalactic community, sparking debates and demands for reforms. Lyria, once a silent sufferer of unspeakable manipulation, had become the face of a movement to uphold dignity and autonomy across the stars. As the reality of their situation set in, each of them realized their lives had changed forever. They were no longer just fugitives or lone rebels. They were leaders in a fight for fundamental rights and integrity. As they continued to watch the unfolding events, the group began to plan their next steps, knowing well that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Yet, they faced it with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to stand together against whatever might come. The makeshift command center in the Omra sector station buzzed with activity. The group, fueled by the global reaction to their broadcast, worked tirelessly to coordinate the influx of support and manage the mounting pressure on galactic authorities. James stood before a large digital map, dotted with lights representing the various sectors that had responded. Look at this, he said, his voice a mix of awe and determination. Support is coming from every corner of the galaxy. Our message didn't just get through. It resonated. Marco, busy at another console, chimed in without looking up. We've got several coalitions forming, demanding reforms and oversight on biochemical treatments. They're calling for a summit. Henrik, who had been coordinating medical testimonies from other victims, added, there's a push to set up a tribunal to investigate these abuses. It's gaining traction. Lyria, who had become more than just the face of the movement but its heart as well, looked up from her communications with various advocacy groups. We've started something powerful, she said, her voice steady and more confident than ever. We need to keep the momentum. James nodded, turning back to the map. The next step is to ensure this leads to concrete change. We need to organize a formal presentation of our findings to the Galactic Council. We'll need every bit of evidence and every ally we can muster. Marco finally turned away from his console, his face serious. There's been some pushback, though. Some sectors are trying to suppress the movement, claiming it's based on false allegations. That's expected, Henrik said grimly. But we have the truth on our side. And overwhelming public support. James tapped on the map, zooming in on a sector known for its political influence. We'll need to focus our efforts here. If we can get them on board, it would sway many undecided regions. Lyria stood, her figure resolute. I'll prepare a statement. We need to address these attempts to discredit our claims head-on. As they strategized, a message beeped through the station's old communication system. James opened it, a smile breaking across his face. The Galactic Council has agreed to hear our case. "We've got a session date." Cheers broke out among the group, a momentary release in the midst of their relentless planning. Marco clapped both James and Henrik on the back. "We did it, boys. We're taking this all the way." "But this is just the beginning," Lyria added, her eyes alight with fervor. "Now we really start the fight." In the following weeks, they prepared meticulously. Lyria, with the help of James and Henrik, compiled a comprehensive dossier of evidence, including testimonies, medical reports, and leaked documents. Marco worked on securing their communications and ensuring that their data couldn't be sabotaged. When the day of the council session arrived, they transmitted their presentation from the safety of the Omra station, broadcasting to an unprecedented assembly of species and representatives. Lyria spoke with compelling clarity, her story and the stories of countless others laying bare the grim realities of biochemical manipulation. James provided diplomatic context, stressing the need for unity and trust in galactic relations. Henrik detailed the medical repercussions, underscoring the ethical violations. Marco monitored the transmission, ensuring every word was heard. The session ended with a standing ovation from many representatives, a symbolic gesture that marked a turning point. In the days that followed, the council voted overwhelmingly to ban the unauthorized use of desire injections, establishing a task force to enforce this legislation and to investigate past abuses. Back at the station, the group watched the aftermath of their efforts unfold across the galaxy. "We've changed the course of history," James said, looking around at his friends. "We did it together," Lyria responded, a smile of relief and satisfaction spreading across her face. As they looked out at the stars, the future seemed bright. Not just for Lyria, but for all beings who had suffered under the shadow of manipulation. They had not only exposed a grave injustice, but had also paved the way for a more ethical and accountable galaxy.